And welcome to the post-Breeders' Cup edition of And They're Off. California was California. It's warm, sunny, scenic. And to make East Coast visitors feel comfortable, Santa Anita featured a racing surface that played exactly like Belmont Park. There certainly was no home field advantage out there, that's for sure. Eastern or Midwest-based trainers won 10 out of the 15 Breeders' Cup races. 2 Europeans won, a South American won. California trainers won all of 2 Breeders' Cup races. Bob Baffert got the duck. But while there was no local bias, there certainly was a speed bias out there, and a pretty severe one. Steve Haskin, what was going on out there with the racetrack at Santa Anita?
Well, reportedly they added a lot of sand to the track, which obviously changed its complexion quite a bit from the Santa Anita that we all knew and loved when Eastern horses would go out there and get creamed every single time. So on one hand, you had this severe speed bias. On the other hand, on the positive side, you had a very safe racetrack. We had 2 full days of racing, and I didn't hear of one injury. Certainly no major injuries. So give Santa Anita a lot of credit for that. They did create a safe racetrack. But on the other hand, it is frustrating to watch race after race where the closers do absolutely nothing and make no impact on the race. And if you're going to have a championship race, then you should not have any kind of a bias, because when the racing world is on stage like that, these races should be fair. And unfortunately, to see really, really good closers just floundering, and to see in the Classic, to see 2 horses in one of the most competitive Classic fields ever, to see 2 horses open up 7, 8 lengths on the field, turning for home, it just leaves a lot to be desired. So my question is, why can't they have a safe track and a fair track? So maybe that's something they can aspire to next time. But from a safety standpoint, no complaints. From a form standpoint, a little too speed bias for me.
Yeah, it's tough when nobody's passing anybody in the stretch, and it just moves the groupie doll performance up a little bit, because she was about the only one to buck the bias, not only the inside bias, but coming from a few lengths off of it and dominating. I don't recall any other horse on the main track doing that.
Well, at least she was in relatively close proximity to the leaders. But you look at the Classic, when you have horses like Ron the Greek and some of the other deep closers in the race that need to come from way out of it, those horses never made any kind of an impact at all.
Yeah.
And basically what we had, the last thing we needed in the Breeders' Cup is a conveyor belt race to decide a championship. Because listen, I see enough of that at Belmont Park.
Yeah.
So I don't need to go to Santa Anita to see those kind of races. I can see it at Belmont Park where nobody changes positions throughout the entire race.
Although it's a little warmer in California, Steve. You enjoyed it out there. Come on.
Well, we'll get to that later.
All right. We had 5 races for 2-year-olds. As you know, Lasix, Salix, whatever you want to call it, was banned in the 2-year-old races at the Breeders' Cup this year. I counted about 50 starters in those 5 races combined. We had a total of 3 of them who bled afterwards. A lot of people are making issues about the California Equine Medical Director, who is incapable of thinking before he speaks in general, and who claimed that nobody bled before anybody even inspected the horses. I thought the Lasix-free deal worked pretty well here. Let's face it, horses do bleed through Lasix also, so who knows if those 3 would have bled anyway. Of course, the trainers of those horses are upset, as they're going to be. People on the other hand were screaming about, oh, there's no form in these races. How are people going to bet these races? Nobody knows what the form's going to be. Well, guess what? Shanghai Bobby won the juvenile as the favorite. The 3 best fillies in the juvenile fillies finished 1, 2, 3. You can argue about the order, but those were the best 3 in the race. And 2 Europeans won the grass races for juveniles. I'd say that form was pretty solid, Steve.
I totally agree with everything you say. I know, a good horse like Capo Bestone finished third in the juvenile, and he, despite bleeding. But, let's not make this sound like an epidemic. 3 out of 50 horses is far from an epidemic. And you mentioned Shanghai Bobby. Well, let's look at Shanghai Bobby. Shanghai Bobby came from cold weather to hot weather. He arrived a day late after the being delayed a day because of the storm. Had to have an extra van ride. Flew out there, like I said, got in there late. Wound up with having to undergo a lot of stress in the stretch. So if a horse was going to bleed without coming off of Lasix, it would be Shanghai Bobby. I mean, everything was against him. He had a gut-wrenching stretch run, and he held off the closer in the race and won the race and locked up his championship and did not bleed. So if you look at a horse like that, I mean, he had every reason to bleed, and he didn't. Yeah. So the bottom line is, I think it's, number one, it's too early to make any kind of a judgment based on one experiment, because that's all we're going by. I got to read you a headline in the Daily Racing Form, all right? The headline in the Daily Racing Form reads, Lasix ban results in trio of 2-year-olds bleeding. Really? The Lasix ban resulted in a trio? How about bleeding resulted in 3 horses bleeding? Yeah. I mean, where's the proof of that? Yeah. I mean, where did they come up with a headline like that? The Lasix ban resulted in it.
Yeah, horses do bleed through Lasix, folks, okay? So you can't even say that the lack of Lasix caused that bleeding. And you know what? 3 horses out of 50, yeah, it's disappointing for the people connected to those horses, but this is not an epidemic. You're absolutely right, Steve. And let's get the drugs out of this sport. And again, you want to take exception to the doctor out in California who can't open his mouth without sticking his foot in it. That's one thing, but that's not the issue here. The issue here is getting drugs out of the sport and how this went, and I think it went pretty damn good. That's my opinion of it. So, like you say, Steve, it's early, but I think there was a great start, and all the screaming memes who said the roof and the sky were going to fall in, that did not happen here. So there you go.
Yeah, I know. I mean, if you had a whole bunch of horses bleeding, you could say, oh, okay, our horses are really so totally dependent on it. Well, obviously, we're not that dependent on it.
Yeah, something to be taken into the future. All right. We had a lot of great racing out there, Steve. Besides Tony Bennett, what were your top moments of the Breeders' Cup?
I didn't even hear Tony Bennett, did you?
I very briefly in the background, yeah.
I assume he did okay.
Nobody was complaining.
Well,
he may have been on Lasix, I think. I'm not sure.
Well, there were a lot of memorable moments. This is from a personal standpoint. I have to look at the Classic, because not only did you have one of the few really exciting stretch runs on the entire 2 days, but listen, this was one for the good guys. I mean, the 2 horses that finished 1-2, they were a great story, great people behind them, and to see 2 horses like Fort Larned and Mucho Macho Man going at each other, and again, just talking afterwards, to Janice Witham, who's been in the game for so long, and it's just all class, and Ian Wilkes and Kathy Ridfo and the Reeves. I mean, it's just a great story. The feel-good story for me was Groupie Doll, and I don't see how it cannot be for most people, because the story of this rags to riches filly and the Bradleys was just one for the books. I mean, it was just great to see her win that way, and you had to feel really, really good about it. Of course, Wise Dan, again, was a small-time trainer, but Morton Fink has been around. He was a veteran in the game when I got in over 40 years ago. So I mean, to see him have a horse like Wise Dan was a great story. But one story I don't want people to forget about in that race is Animal Kingdom, who I thought ran as good a race as anybody on the card, including Wise Dan. I mean, what this horse did coming off a long layoff, I mean, this horse was totally trapped from the quarter pole to the 8th pole, had no shot to finish in the money, and came charging through horses, was beaten a length and a half, And I'm not going to say he would have won the race with a clean trip, but I'll tell you one thing, it would have been a lot closer than a length and a half. And I give all the credit to Graham Motion and to Animal Kingdom. And I think we're going to see a superstar next year because this horse is a lot better than most people think. So kudos to Animal Kingdom for running an incredible race.
Yeah, I think the only question there is staying healthy. Hopefully he's past his problems. I think if you didn't get a tingle out of Groupie Doll's race, folks, you better visit the doctor. You need to get a heart put in. That was just an incredible moment. Fred Bradley and Buff Bradley are two small-time guys relatively in this business who bred nothing mares to very little stallions and have now come up with two superstars in Brass Hat and Groupie Doll. It is a great story. The heart of Royal Delta in the Ladies Classic just re-rallying as soon as they came at her, becoming only the second repeat winner of that race. That was a spectacular run from Royal Delta. Ironically, joining the Whittams Bayakoa as the only repeat winner of the Ladies Classic / Distaff. And a couple of other horses who were magnificent in defeat besides Animal Kingdom. Point of entry, pretty unlucky, a little slow getting off the rail there in the turf, but he certainly showed a ton of heart coming down to the finish. And also, he's had enough from the I'll have another group of Paul Redham, who won the Derby and Preakness this year. He's had enough, got stopped dead by a backing up horse and re-rallied and gave Shanghai Bobby all he wanted coming down the lane. I know Paul Redham is fairly happy that he may have another Derby contender coming up next year. So great performances all over the Breeders' Cup.
And let's not forget Shanghai Bobby, because he did run his guts out and he had a lot of things going against him. And again, from a personal standpoint, the 1-2 finishes there are owned by two of my favorite owners, the Wolves and the Lucarellis and Paul Redham. So to see them run 1-2.
Steve, remember back to the spring, we had Jack Wolf and Paul Redham on the same show with their 3-year-olds Algorithm and I'll have another. So there you go. They end up not only doing that, but end up running 1-2 in the juvenile with their 2-year-olds. So best of luck to those guys, and Don Lucarelli as well with Starlight. Steve, I've always been a proponent of the Breeders' Cup moving from track to track, state to state, region to region every year. Gives fans around the country a chance to visit this magnificent event. I'm starting to rethink that, given the Breeders' Cup expansion to 2 days and all the logistics that are now involved with it. I know several casual fans who watched the TV coverage of this Breeders' Cup and were just blown away by the way Santa Anita looked and the mountains and the horses. And you know what? It looked like the place to be. It looked like a cool place. It looked like a place that people wanted to get involved in and a sport that people wanted to get involved in. And there's a lot to be said about those visuals and those metrics. Steve, I'll put you on the spot here. Should Santa Anita, or warm climates at least, be the permanent home of the Breeders' Cup?
Well, you're asking me at the wrong time. Let me first get used to the frigid cold and the impending nor'easter that we're about to have here in the east, and then I'll let you know for sure. Right now, the way I feel now, it's California. Here I come. Those Santa Anita mornings are cathartic. I think back in just the whole week of breakfast at Rosie's and the mountains and not having to watch the weather. I miss all that. You know what? I'm changing my mind, by the way. I just convinced myself I wanted to Santa Anita every year.
Well, they did put on a good show out there. Everything went, most things went very well, and there's a lot to be said for getting people involved in this and making it look like an event that people do want to be part of. So it should be interesting to see what happens. I know we're upsetting a lot of New Yorkers, but anyway. Steve, despite our best efforts to drive them away, people actually do watch this show. We met literally dozens of And They're Off fans at Santa Anita, got to chat with many of you, and in all seriousness, it is really gratifying to know that people do enjoy what we do. Steve, it was certainly a love fest with people who love your writing in particular, and I know you're moved by that as well, meeting these folks.
Yeah, definitely. And we're very grateful for your support and for all your kind words, and we thank you for coming up to us and just having nice, friendly chats. It made our whole morning.
Yeah, it was great. It really is one of the fun things to meet folks out there. So we really appreciate you folks. And it is great getting to talk with you. We want to thank you. We want to thank our sponsor, Darby Dan Farm. Stable Boy's gone again, folks. Second time in a row. He's off working the November sales, but we've got the X-Man, Adam Spradling, at the board today, doing a fine job. We'll be back with you for the next, and they're off in 2 weeks. That is Thanksgiving week, but it'll be early Thanksgiving week. We'll be back up Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. That's November 20th. And we'll see y'all then. Steve, take care. Catch up on your sleep.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
All right.
Good seeing you again. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.